Well, thank you so much for everyone joining us. Can you hear me? Yes. Excellent. All right, so who here has heard about AI? Show of hands. Who here is tired of hearing about AI? Show of hands. Well, we have a group today that is going to help talk about how building AI applications in the real world works. We've kind of been there, done that. Our talk's going to focus really on not the technology side, and maybe we can geek about that later, but really it's much more about how do you guarantee that when you want to build and execute and deliver anything intelligent, right? AI is just a buzzword, anything that leverages analytics or insights or something beyond just out of the box, flip a switch functionality. Mm-hmm. How you do that within your organization, whether it's with in-house resources, external resources, or more often than not, some combination thereof. I'll let my panel introduce themselves real quick.
Hi, I'm Doug Jennings. I'm the Vice President of Data and Analytics at Lowe's. In my role, I've been in my role for about 2+ years. I'm responsible for enterprise data management, analytics, data engineering, and data science.
Jason Stutz, VP of Ecom and Analytics. Been at the company for 14 years now. Seems like I was telling Doug, every 2 years my title changes. And that's because I did it all, whether it's creative, design, web design, SEO, CPC, all that stuff. And then, when the 2010-ish or so hit, it became like, hey, what are we doing with the analytics? So took over that, and then now just kind of running the whole ecom shop.
Very cool. And Garrett Eastham, technically a founder and principal investigator of a boutique AI consulting firm called Open Conjecture, but been in enterprise retail for about 10 years now. Cut my teeth at Bizarre Voice, building the big data team there. Founded a company called EdgeCase that did product data enrichment and sold that to GroupBuy in the space. And then most recently, before this, was doing AI consulting work for a boutique firm in Austin called Valkyrie Intelligence. So I'm very happy to be here. So I'm not going to go too much in AI. Again, this is not a technical talk. Very much we want to talk about pragmatics here. But in my mind, AI lets you create leverage, specifically in the digital economy. And what that really means when it gets down to the brass tacks is you've got to be able to leverage, to enjoy those benefits, you have to be able to apply that leverage. And regardless of an algorithm or a framework or whatever, end of the day, AI and insights, intelligence is all about helping you make better decisions faster. And the way that I like to think about and frame problems, no matter what you're doing across the board, is you're either trying to grow revenue, you're trying to lower costs, or you're trying to spend something more efficiently. And that should be the lens by which we look at everything in our business. And more particularly, because we're in digital commerce, we want to frame everything from an investment and an opportunity standpoint around commerce activities. And so today we're going to talk about different examples across these lovely gentlemen's organizations where they've tackled different aspects related to adaptive merchandising, which is a fancy word for personalization. I didn't want to put personalization on there because I think it's overused, but throughout the idea of how do you change the merchandising for a user based upon any number of factors. How do I approach customer acquisition in a new intelligent ways, right? Whether it's new creative ways of kind of identifying new keywords or customer segments, or even more creative things around leveraging new channels for customer acquisition. Assortment intelligence, how do we go figure out what to give customers, to what new opportunities, what new products should we supply? And then lastly, how do we get them to them in the best way? And so looking at kind of other examples in the industry, everyone's very familiar with Netflix, still one of the most popular recommendation engines in the market. They still, to this day, give market about $1 billion worth of value on the organization. And so we can't get away from the idea of recommendation engines being still a key part of the mix, whether they're off the shelf or custom developed, and we're going to talk about some of the work that the teams here are doing in their organizations. On the customer acquisition side, companies like 1-800-Flowers have been exploring fantastic ways to use chatbots. Facebook Messenger has a great platform and framework for enabling new ways to engage customers at scale in a social channel in a way that's automated. On this assortment intelligence side, Stitch Fix has been doing some fantastic work mining customer feedback to actually give insights into how to not just recommend products better, but actually what to go stock. And so they do a lot of NLP mining, and they're one of the best companies that has given insights back to the open source community for tooling there. And then lastly, within Jet, for example, one of the key things that made them different and kind of fed a lot of their early success was the ability to look at the shopping patterns in a regional area and to be able to actually use that to optimize the shipping side. So they were able to look at demand within certain neighborhoods and certain areas and use that to adjust not just the price, but also to intelligently ship products to warehouses in a way that gave them that advantage. And so looking at our own panelist organization, so Lowe's, I'm not sure if you guys know or not, is actually one of the leaders in augmented reality. So the innovation lab there has been developing experiences that let customers try products out in their home using this new technology that lets you place products virtually in the real world. And has and they've been doing this for I think 2 or 3 years now, right? Like been one of the forefronts there. Or within barbecue guys, they're now working on their own custom recommendation engine that is above and beyond what you might think of like off the shelf kind of a collaborative filtering. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the details there, but being able to actually take this into a specific customer environment and know about how and why that works there. So how do we guarantee success? And so before we kind of dive into some examples with the panel here, we have a framework that we will want to think about each of these examples. And so the 3 pillars are kind of straightforward. One is any project you do in AI, you need to have team and resources. And so the key there is obviously not just technical talent, but also having business and product sponsors that understand how that technical challenge and opportunity can be blended in the organization. And process and workflow is critical as well. So even if you built the best algorithm for anything, being able to actually have the change management and the executive overhead to make it successful, guarantee success. And then lastly, but not leastly, having a strong data foundation is incredibly imperative. And we'll talk a lot about some of the work that even within barbecue guys, they're doing around product attribution. So with that in mind, which of you guys would like to go first from like one of your examples?
Yeah, I could talk about the team side of things, but we really started investing in AI 3 or 4 years ago, and it was, like I said earlier, the analytics side of things, it was just something that we did. We had Google Analytics, the free version, and we would never thought about paying for analytics because it was something that it was given to you. And then we signed on with Adobe Analytics after that, Amateur. And that's when it's really started taking off. We had a bad integration. And so me and the CTO had to dig our hands and learn the technical side of things and do it ourselves. So I think that was kind of like a blessing in disguise because I really got to see what the power could be and all of this metadata that I can send to Adobe and then start learning from that. And like I said, that was about 3 or 4 years ago. And once I did that, that's when I realized, like, hey, I can be the champion of this product because not one person was responsible for data and analytics. Does the data reside in dev? Is it marketing? Is it your customer service reps? They all need it, but somebody needs to focus on it and make sure that the pipes are clean and that you can actually act upon the data. So that's when it really started changing for us, is that I then became director of analytics and just being the product champion of it. And then making sure that I had the team underneath me that can support on a global scale of like how can we scale merchandising or creative design without the use of just doing one thing at a time. And that's when we came up, we'll talk about later from a process standpoint, but the recommendations engine. I saw the idea of everybody not doing the same thing over and over and over, and just how can I use data to kind of automate that and be a little bit smarter tomorrow than what we were today. So that really kind of changed the game for us.
Mm-hmm. Talk about yourself from a team and kind of staffing standpoint.
Yeah, so from a team and staffing standpoint, if you take a step back, Lowe's started to invest heavily in analytics probably 5-6 years ago. Investing a lot into packaged solutions, packaged software such as SaaS and others. When I got into the role, I saw an opportunity for us to really expand into machine learning and AI, and really needing to build out a team of data scientists and data engineers that can work in open source, with open source tools, because the key for us is to deploy these products at web scale. When you think about 1,700 stores, 30,000 SKUs per store, 150 associates per store, the scale becomes very, very large. And so what I did a couple of years ago was start to build out a data science team from about 5 data scientists that worked mostly on Lowe's.com search optimization and product recommendation engines, to building out that data science team of over 50 people today. One thing I also learned is, you hear about AI and machine learning and the hype around that. What people don't tell you is that more of your time is spent on data preparation and deployment, right? Executives like to believe that 99% of your time is spent on building the algorithms and models. And actually, that's the smallest part. So one of the learnings that I had was actually to build a data engineering team that can actually do the data curation, build the pipes, build the foundation into your data science products, right? And then from a deployment perspective, if we're running models at web scale where we have core services calling these models through APIs that we build on my team, how do we ensure that we're being able to deploy those models and have services hit those models in real time without latency? Because the latency will drive a poor customer experience or a poor associate experience. So having the right skills. And then the last piece of the puzzle, it's a very recent piece, is more towards the change management aspect. And we just announced new positions called analytics translators. And so these are the folks on my team that are analytics generalists, but to understand the value of big data, self-service BI, data science products, and even just quick turn everyday analytics. But those are the ones that can work with a business to really tease out the business problem, to understand the problems that we can solve through analytics. So that's kind of been the evolution of our team. And we've got a team that's based in Mooresville, and also about half my staff is in Bangalore, India. We have an office there. So I've got a team of about 350 people right now. So building out that team.
We don't.
That was my next point.
Has
Like
taken some time.
thinking about the different size of kind of retailers and organizations, right? Like a Lowe's versus anyone else, right? So Jason, how have you kind of tackled that in a more kind of?
Well, they said it earlier in the talks earlier is that, don't expect that return on investment and like that ROI, like, hey, this is what you're doing, I need to see the return in 3 months. Like, that's not what the company needs to be. We have to show some sort of roadmap of where we want to go. And you're not just going to put AI or machine learning or just automating systems onto somebody who doesn't even understand that. And then you're expecting them to do their day job plus do this research that's changing every 3 months. So that's kind of where I'm taking the company's direction is, no, these roles, it could be anything. We have no idea what you're going to be working on in 6 months. However, that is the value of the role, that it could be nimble, it could change over time, but it's always looking out the best for the company and making sure that we are evolving as fast as our competitors are.
So you have a role called conversion specialist and analytics translator. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about how you crafted that and because you actually will train folks cross-functionally in an organization, and is a similar role than Lowe's. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
We had 10 product merchandisers, and their job was to take direction from the buyer and say, like, hey, what do you want to move? They always had an agenda. It was either a product, a brand, or a category that they were optimizing. The problem with that is when you optimize that, you're de-optimizing something else, or you're always trying to focus on that one product. And I took the brightest from that team. I said, hey, I'm creating a new team that's just be generalists and try to understand the algorithms opposed to understanding the result. And that has changed the game for us too. It's just because now they see what I saw from a back-end standpoint, and those smart merchandisers are now connecting the dots and saying, wait, if I could just pull this lever, I don't care what we sell. I want to sell anything, all right? The product merchandising team, their task is to sell one thing, or sell one thing really good. So my conversion team is cross-trained from email, pay-per-click for SEO, and I'm trying to get them to be a little bit more vocal in the organization to also train what they're learning. And it's kind of like the evolution of everybody kind of stepping their game up.
And what about the analytics translators? Like, how did that come about, and how do they fit from a maybe process standpoint?
Yeah, so where that came about is it is really that bridge between a data scientist and the business user, and someone from the business is actually going to consume. Because you can have the best PhDs, the smartest folks in the room, building the most complex algorithms, but if you don't understand how it's going to be consumed, right? And one thing I always tell people, don't forget the front end. Right, so if you're building something on the back end, most complex algorithms running through petabytes of data in real time, how do you ensure that the consumption layer, the consumption aspect of that data science product it meets the needs of the business. That's where the analytics translator comes in, because they have deep context of the business, and they can represent the business, not only represent the business, but also we make it a point to bring the business into our agile development of data science products and AI machine learning. So we don't want the business to say, hey, go off, Doug, and go deliver us something. No, they're part and parcel to the actual solution. But what the analytics translator allows us to do is anticipate additional problems before the business identifies those. And so my goal of success is two-pronged. One is to provide the delighters, right? We talked about earlier, Brian number 2 talked about iteration, and then how do you then innovate? We're starting on the iteration, right? But then how do we get to delighting with innovation through data science and machine learning and AI? That's the first aspect. Second aspect of the analytics translator is, at some point in time, there'll likely be a migration of these analytics folks back into the business and decentralizing analytics and put it very close to the business. And then you can, once we get our data managed in an appropriate way, you can start to democratize, what they call democratizing AI, and how do we take some of the more core algorithms and approaches and put that closer to the business.
Right.
So this is kind of a 3-year vision that I have to really make Lowe's a more data and analytically savvy organization. This is just the first step.
Very cool. That's a good segue into, as we think about change management, and you made a good point earlier about, so on the Lowe's side, investing in open source, and on the barbecue guys side, making sure that whatever you do you have levers that you can pull. Maybe you guys can talk a little bit about how you set up projects for success, such that when you want a net new initiative, and we're going to talk about some examples that you guys have in your business this day, like how do you guarantee that that's going to be something that can actually move the needle, or have to the extent that you can guarantee that, right? Like, so maybe from a data engineering standpoint, like how do you, like, we start from like the top end, we'll go kind of like the down from there.
Yeah, so I'm very big on what is the outcome that we're trying to drive, right? So have the business being able to articulate the outcome, partner very closely with finance, right? So they say, okay, as we think about, the iterate piece, right? And so we talk about getting an ROI, right? And so we could say we're going to optimize our inventory flow. We can optimize our safety stock. We can optimize, and we can take hundreds of millions of dollars out of our inventory balances. Everyone's going to sign up for that, right? But that's easier said than done. So what we like to do is really clearly define and really start small. Start with proof of concept kind of approach, right? And ensure that we're starting with a small sliver of the business, and we like to start with kind of those early adopters within the business, right? And then from a development standpoint is, again, how do you identify a more definite problem and kind of box that problem in a little bit, so that you're solving for a solution that you can actually then go to market and test, right? It's got to be something that we have to be able to test, and we have to be able to test with the business. It's one thing to build a POC and it's a simulation and it's nice to have, but we need to make sure that we're integrated tightly with our tech organization, and I report to the CIO, so that's naturally happening now, to ensure that we can embed or ingest our model output into our tech solutions. And
do you often find that you have to partner with, parts of the organization that are outside of your control to be able to consume that, or does that lever dictate what you end up having to research and do, or vice versa? How does that kind of play out?
Yeah, we'll have to work with various parts of the organization. The biggest part for us is technology, right? So I'm being charged with building analytic products, data science products that are, again, at web scale, that can integrate into our core operating services, right? And so the big part is working with our technical architects and directors of technology solutions, right, to ensure that we're building those pipes, right, and ensuring that as they build new tech stacks, because if you heard our new CIO say, hey, we want to move from packaged software to build, right? How do we build in our new tech stacks solutions with open architecture from an API perspective that can call into our data science products? So while we're thinking about POC, right, and to prove that this decision is better tomorrow than it is today, we're also keeping an eye to how do we actually scale that.
For sure. And then Jason, within your organization, you've done a lot of really great work around SmartRank and kind of the the intuition of being able to do work that you could have immediate impact, right? And like
that was for the owner, just because he's a squirrel chaser. He sees one big problem and he wants the whole entire company to focus on it for the next 2 months. So that's where I came up with SmartRank, and the idea is that I can have 50 data points coming into our merchandising online, and if he wanted to offload some inventory, he walks in the warehouse and he sees that there's a bunch of used goods. He could say, I need this campaign needs to focus on this, and I'm like, okay. So instead of having all those people kind of deploy that, basically in SmartRank, I could just pull up that lever, and then what happens is all of my pages, it would get more weight, more scoring. We're sending it to data feeds to to our search teams and stuff like that. So those products overnight would get more real estate, and if you know retail on web commerce, the more real estate you get, the more sales you're gonna impact. So that was kind of like the offset of like, hey, not everybody has to go and do everything. It's just one little lever that I can pull, and that's on for everything. So, if we want to get rid of some clearance items, again, it's just one little lever.
Very cool. So I want to talk about data foundation, but in the context of love for you to talk about 2 examples from your organization of very specific projects. I think the assortment intelligence project is probably a good one for you, and I think we can elaborate more on the SmartRank, particularly how it relates to what you're doing with Akenio and some other stuff there.
It's really not everybody asks a lot of questions in analytics if they're not in the analytical world, and usually I'll go to meetings and the jargon goes over their head, or they just don't understand it, so they kind of like just trust me. But we started deploying a.
That never happens anywhere, right? No.
Yeah. No. Anybody ever heard of like a DDOM? It's called a data-driven operating model. So we started sending out a DDOM report every morning at 6 a.m. And basically, this should tell the entire company what's happening, right? So I don't have to have a sales meeting, and everybody gets it. And then a lot of people start asking questions once they start getting that DDOM report, that PDF, that 6 KB PDF report I sent out. So then they start asking like, okay, how are you building this? What is this for? And then that's when us and the executives can all kind of meet and say like, hey, we're going to use conversion rate to this, or we're going to use linear attribution for this channel and stuff like this. Because before that, it was, hey, let's have a meeting about your numbers, and then how are you collecting your numbers will go over everybody's head. So that kind of changed the game for us of like, how are you collecting the data? And then who is making sure that data is reported the same way over time.
And then in assortment intelligence, so we've built an assortment optimization suite for our merchandising team this year. And as we start to peel back the different components of that, it starts with a kind of a dashboard that they can look at the performance, the operational performance of their product, right? If you're a merchant and you have a handful of products, it could be financial, operational, could be attribute life cycle information, could be localization metrics. And then we start getting into the white space. So where do you have gaps versus what customers are asking for? So how do you know what customers are asking for? Well, you have access to search data, right? Search data zipped into a location. So we understand what customers are looking for, not just for products, but customers buy attributes, especially in home improvement, they buy attributes. You're not necessarily buying a power tool. You might be buying a power tool of certain battery life or of certain power. You might be buying a certain refrigerator of certain cubic foot or certain attributes of that refrigerator. And so understanding, there's a lot of data out there, not only on competitive price information, but competitive information around what your competitors are actually selling in their location. So identifying the white space, both from what a customer is doing, but also from what your competition is doing. And then the science really comes into the assortment optimization tool, which takes into account looking at a ton of historical sales data, looking at the external data, looking at your inventory data, because you got to make sure if you're not selling something, is it because it wasn't even in stock at that location at that time, the customer was actually trying to buy something, or they actually not buying it because you don't have the right attributes of that product. So when you start thinking about product attributes, then you start thinking about okay, how do we actually capture product information? So we go to our vendors, our merchants go to vendors, and historically they've gotten operational attributes, right? The weight, the length, right? Those types of things that impact your operational decisions, right? That impacts your supply chain,
margin,
your flow of your inventory into your DCs, queue to the stores, etc. customers don't necessarily buy on operational attributes. They buy more on marketing attributes. So going back to the business and saying, okay, we need to capture more of the marketing attributes. Okay, why do you need that, right? Because then that allows us to do our algorithms to really calculate your demand transfer, right? To new product introductions, right? So right now we forecast demand of new products based, well, not now, but in the past, you work with your vendors and say, okay, these are what customers want. If it's a new product that's new to the company, right? How do you put more science to what's your forecast versus actually what is the vendor telling you it would sell,
exactly.
right? And so getting all these marketing attributes, when you think about it from a data perspective, I'm not even talking about is that clean data, is what's the quality of that data, how frequently is that data updated, do you have metadata around that data? So when you think about from a data foundation standpoint, just one thing that popped in delivering this is a new way to think about data that you've captured today, and how do you capture it in a different way or different attributes going forward.
So a good kind of segue into kind of maybe wrapping up some questions here about data foundation. So obviously, like Jason, you guys are investing in Akinio and PIM, and you touched on a lot of, very familiar with the product attribute space. I'm curious about, there's both the tactical aspect of how do you get that data, and then the kind of resource side about where and how do you make it available. How and at a macro level, how do you prioritize data foundation work, which is not necessarily sexy or going to be the revenue generating immediately, with demands on the business to deliver on other kinds of projects you could be doing.
It's such a foundation if you want to do anything in AI or just insights. If you want insights on, which category is performing the best, well, how you define a category, and that's usually built off of product attributes. So, like Garrett said, we're investing in Akinio right now, and that's the help with that. And people who were filling out the data and is now going to be in charge of in data governance of which those data sets that our vendors or themselves are putting in. So it's the same amount of work. It's just, hey, what are you doing to make sure that the data is similar, so where we can actually run some models on that data set, but now they understand what we're trying to do with the data. And yes, it is for the consumer, but it's really not. It's for us to run the models and to collect that, get the insights from the data itself.
And from a macro level, what we're doing is I've identified an individual to lead an enterprise data management function within my team for Lowe's. And so we could go back and so if you look at all the different data domains today, we have varying degrees of data management expertise and practices applied to those data domains. So what we're doing going forward, as I mentioned, as we build new core services in our tech space, how do we ensure that we have the proper data management practices in place? Well, again, data quality, metadata capture, data lineage, right? Anything new we're building internally, we want to make sure that we have a more robust data management practice put in place, and also ensure that we're doing a real-time data streaming into our analytic ecosystem. So the real-time data streaming will allow us to build machine learning and AI, trusting the quality of the data, understanding the metadata of that data that's flowing in real time. So that's how we're architecting it. And so when it comes into the analytic ecosystem, we can move at a much faster pace, whether it's visualization for BI or whether it's building AI and ML products. And so that's what we're doing. And it's the same enterprise data management practices for any third-party data that we ingest will come into the analytic ecosystem. And so we would be subject to ensuring that we have the same data management practices in place. But unless you have that, it's really difficult to deploy machine learning and AI at scale.
Makes sense. And then lastly, the hardest question of how do you individually or as an organization prioritize what to go after, when and how, who tells you what, where, or how do you kind of make that call on, of the 10 different things you could do, which one you're going to put resources on and which one you're going to say, sorry, I can't do that?
Well, I'll take that, and I'll try to keep it under a few seconds here. Last fall, we had a new CEO come in, and he was asking me, where do we want to double down with data science and analytics? And I just, again, if you think back to Brian number 2, the iterate, right? Look at where you can drive the most productivity, right? Whether it's sales productivity, margin productivity, inventory productivity. So that's where we landed on assortment optimization, pricing and promotional optimization, and inventory optimization. So and then when you peel the onion back, there's multiple tactics. But that's how we prioritize. It came straight from the CEO.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think I was having drinks with the CEO at one time, and he was just like, "Hey, Jason, where do you think we need to be? What do you want to do?" I said, quite honestly, just put me in the labs. Like, let's, these big box companies have labs, innovation labs, and it's like, we don't. But that's kind of one of, like, if you want me to develop something that's not there and focus on it, literally let me run a division called the labs to where we could just work on things that are going to move the needle. I like to work on projects like the assortment intelligence. I think, as a previous merchandiser, that's the most single important piece of a website. Like, we're trying to sell product. If you can't optimize that, then what are you optimizing? So I like to spend my time there on anything that, let's say if you look back at the end of the day, you say, okay, we had this many transactions. What did you learn? What did the company learn from that? And I'm not talking about insights or a report of like your sales. It's like, did you take that information and did it feed your system to where now your system is smarter tomorrow? Like, if you're not doing that, that's what you really need to think about is whether it's a phone call or email, something about that email should be powering the email system of tomorrow. And if it's not, I think that's where the thought leaders need to change and make sure they're doubling down on that.
Very cool. Well, we're at time. Thank you so much for your guys' support, and thank you.